It's a great privilege to have you all here. It's really a special time that we get to start to think and spend a great deal of time thinking about cultural, historical and activity theory and how we use it in our work. And it's a great privilege to start off with Eugene as our first speaker. Now, just a couple of housekeeping points. Do turn your camera on if you can. If you've got a fairly quiet background, you can leave your microphone on, but generally turn it off. Do use as many of you are, the chat panel to talk about things. And remember that we'll have the Wonder Room open at the end of this session. So each of these sessions will go for about an hour and a half. So do be active, both talking within the chat, but also once we start to have discussions. And welcome everyone. It'll be a great 3 days. And the final thing is that I'll hand over to Hongji, to Veronica and Susan, who will be really running this from now on. So I'll shut up and not annoy people. Eugene.
Okay.
I'm sorry, dear people. I see Katerina is with us, and if I remember correctly, Katerina wanted to say a couple of welcoming words as a president of ISCAR. Eugene, if you don't mind, can you give five minutes time to Katerina?
1 minute, 1 minute only.
1 minute, no. Okay, Eugene, are you okay with this?
Yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but I really want Katerina to say something. Sorry for that.
Thank you very much, Nikolai and John and all of you. I just say congratulations to every one of you that you offer us this great opportunity within the pandemic, within all this crisis, and this academic work is the vehicle to overcome this pandemic and this crisis, current crisis right now. So thank you very much. I would like to congratulate all of you, and this is a very rigorous work you have done with the preparation of the PhD students, all this drive, all these materials. And I would like to congratulate Nikolai for this new journal that is affiliated with our international society, and is a very great honor for the society to have a new journal affiliated within. So this is all for me right now. The front is for Eugene, and I do not spend his time. Just congratulate any one of you and all together. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Let me start. So my name is Eugene Matosov, and I'm from University of Delaware. And I want to say also thank you for organizers of this summer institute and that event. And thank you everybody for coming here today and tonight. Well, I would say not tonight, this morning or whatever time zone you are in. It's actually early evening on my place, and so let me start. So I hope I share the screen, and I hope you can see that. And let me pass. This is very kind of interesting. It's a kind of a board when we all can write. And let me send you a link where you can actually write on that. My suggestion, if you're going to write that, maybe you can start with your name, and just maybe first name will be fine. And so this is the link where we can write. So this is kind of a board when we can use it all together. So the way how I plan to, like our meeting is, well, first I'm doing introduction to this. And the second, I was just thinking, I don't know how many of you read my article about sociocultural positivism. but I'm doing my presentation in opposite direction. Instead of criticizing and providing a critical review of sociocultural approach, I'm doing reverse thing. I'm actually introducing dialogic research anti-methodology, and I'm doing that from, I develop interesting genre for that. I call it quick and dirty mini research. So I will do research with you. We will do research together, and then we'll reflect on our experiences. The reason I'm doing that, because my article, in a way, it's a reflection on some experiences that I had. So I want to share these experiences with you in a way by engaging you in these experiences. So this will be the first part of this our meeting. The second part of the meeting will be about discussion of the readings, and the way how we can discuss that, we will split also into groups and develop questions and quotations that we together can discuss. If somebody didn't read the article, that's no problem. You can actually, will start, while you will be in the group, you can actually start looking at this article and find interesting quotes that attract your attention, look through that, and so don't feel bad. You are very welcome. And also you can ask good questions of other people in your group, like, for example, what's the article is about? Which is, if everybody read the article, it sounds like a stupid question, but people who didn't read the article will be very helpful in this case, because they can ask so-called stupid questions, which is actually usually very profound questions, like what's the article is about, because usually people read it differently. Whoever, and if you didn't even finish reading the article, that's also fine. So we will start with watching a short video. I put that video on YouTube, but I will show you through the shared screen. And if it doesn't work well for you, you can always switch to this video. This is a fragment from a terrific research that done by Joe Tobin and his colleagues. It's called Preschool and Reculture. He did it twice. He did it in 80s and 2000s. So this fragment comes from his research in the 80s. One immediately warning that the quality of the video, it was done in 80s from with non-professional camera even back then. So just expect that the quality will be not good, but you will see the event. You grasp the event pretty good. So this is like a 4-minute fragment, and in this fragment, let me share the screen because I stopped that video on particular moment. Let me see. Okay. I hope you can see that video. This is a conflict. This is in preschool. This is Japanese preschool. And there will be a conflict between these two boys. You can see them in yellow t-shirt. His name is Satoshi. And the boy with the blue pants, his name is Hiroki. So this will be a conflict between these two boys. And you will observe that. And then you can hear commentaries because this video was shown to Chinese and American educators, preschool educators, and they make comments. And then these comments were passed to Japanese educators, and you can hear them responding to these comments. And after that, we might split in the small groups and discuss whatever attracts your attention, what you like, what you don't like, whether or not you agree with Japanese, American, or Chinese educators, or you have your own views on what's happened. Maybe it's completely, you are kind of different, and why. So we will do this, our mini research. So this is things that was videotaped in 80s in Japan. So let me show, to start from the beginning. Oops, I'm not starting.
Here, the little boy in the yellow shirt, Satoshi, is unhappy because Hiroki has hit him. Satoshi will touch Hiroki with his paper ninja throwing star. Hiroki will step on Satoshi's wrist. As Satoshi starts once more to cry, Midori appears and leads Satoshi away. Midori will ask Satoshi what happened, and then repeat the story to Fumiko and Yasuko, who are standing close by. Fumiko then says to Satoshi, "That always happens when you play with Hiroki. If you don't want to get hurt, find someone else to play with." A few moments later, the teacher is sweeping up inside. Midori will run over to tell her that Hiroki is throwing flashcards over the balcony. Fukui-sensei replies, "Is that so? Why are you telling me? You do something about it." And she continues sweeping. Here, Fukui-sensei comes out to the balcony and tells the children, "Hurry up, it's cleanup time. Hurry, hurry." Chinese and American audiences who watched this footage were invariably disturbed by Fukui's failure to do something about Hiroki's continuous misbehavior. In contrast, when we showed this footage at Komatsudani, the staff approved of Fukui's approach. Principal Yoshizawa said, "Isn't it natural for children to fight? If there was no fighting, that would be a problem." The assistant principal explained that she believes it's best when children handle their disputes on their own. Many Japanese preferred the classroom management approach displayed at Komatsudani to the approach they saw in our footage of an American preschool. Many Japanese viewers were critical of what they described as a too heavy, adult-centered approach to dealing with children's misbehavior. As one teacher told us, it's only by fighting when they are young that children learn to deal with disputes and to learn empathy.
Okay, I hope you could hear well, and you could also see well. It's not jerky for you. Okay, so sounds good. Sounds good. This is I like technology when it works. Well, it's very, in my view, very interesting fragment, interesting to discuss. And will be interesting to see whether or not you agree or disagree with Japanese educators, and whether or not you agree with American, what you think about, what you noticed, and so on and so forth. I'm suggesting us to split into small groups and discuss that. And I'm thinking like about having 15 minutes for discussion. Do you think it will be okay? Like, okay. Good. Okay, so let me do that. So just my suggestion for discussion, like if you have any question, by the way, if you have any clarification question, feel free to ask it now if you want to ask something about the video itself. But if you have questions, you generate questions about whole episode, that will be great. Any interesting observations, what attracted your attention, excitements, reflections, what you like, what you don't like, agree, disagree with educators, and whatever you want to discuss, feel free to, it's up to you. And now, again, let me send you a link to the, because some people I see that you joined a little bit later, it's just to link to this board when we can discuss that. And one more thing, that if you want to rewatch something or you want to see that, this is a link to YouTube. If you want to say, you know, if people sometimes remember different things and say, no, that didn't happen. So you can actually look back in this video and point it out. No, that's happened, or no, it didn't happen, something like that. But it's up to you again. So let me split you in the groups of maybe 4 people. Where is this? Okay. And I'm doing that randomly. Okay, so there is, I need to create more. So I will create, what about this?
You want me to help you to set up the breakout room, Eugene?
No, I'm fine. Thank you. I'm just thinking, I'm trying to experiment how, okay, probably 7 groups. Okay, 7 groups, 3, 4 people. Right? Okay, because it's comfortable. Okay, I'm creating that. See you in 15 minutes.
Eugene, there is an
Yes.
error, and I will send another link from that error. If people get the error for this discussion board, I know how to go around that. I'll send the new link, because it seems that people can't all come on the same.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Ooh, I can see that. Wow. Did you send it right now, Anna?
No, not yet. Just a moment.
Are you sure it will work? Oh, this
Let
is.
me just check. It's just, yeah.
I don't think it will work.
No, it won't. No.
It won't work. Okay, well, let me see. You see, I was saying, I like technology when it works well. Be always careful. Okay, so but we can discuss that in the groups. You don't need to write
Actually,
much.
just refresh the screen and it will work.
Yeah,
So the
and
discussion board is
link.
still okay. It's still working.
Okay, good.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm creating the groups. Good. Thank you. Thanks for solving this problem collectively. Feel free to, if you need me, you can call me in your group. Okay. Konstantina, if you need my help, let me know. You should, oh, good. Again, Konstantina, if you need help, let me know. Katerina, if you need help, let me know.
Eugene, can you call me again for the room too?
Okay, I will move you in one group and then immediately back to this group. You're in in room number 2. Okay, let me just do that because I don't know how to do that. Okay, I put room number 5 and then back to room number 2. Just a second.
No worries, okay.
So, okay, and now I'm moving you back to room number 2. So you should receive invitation right now. Did you get invitation? Up. Shrug. Hi, Shrug. I'm sending you to group number 5. Hi, Sarah. Okay, we're doing a group work, if you hear me. So I'm sending you to the group number 6. Okay. Anybody needs help? Darcy or Katerina? Oh, room number 2 is coming back. Okay. So you just finished discussing. That's good. Okay, let's wait. How much time we have? Like we have like 3 minutes for everybody else. So what did you discuss?
Is anybody going to say? Just, I think we sort of discuss kind of, how we look into the kids, whether they're beings or becomings. If we see from the being perspective, they have the voices, and they have the conflicts, and they're able to handle the conflicts. If you look into from their perspective, if you really take this child-centered approach, but if you look into from becoming perspective, then you bring your perspective, adult perspective, into looking there actively. Then there comes sort of control and then mechanism into place. But when you accept the fact that this is the process of becoming, socialized, and then managing sort of one activities, one conflict, and then I think we will understand children correctly from that approach. They have their own voices. I sort of, by this Japanese perspective, probably Bakhtin. I have read a few of your reading also. I understand Bakhtin is also in that way too. Everybody has a voice, and probably everybody is capable of probably, I don't know what Bakhtin said about the kids, but I have also read some of the perspective that this big debate of being and becoming. So I tend to look into this activity from that perspective.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. So what kind of, with whom would you agree? With Japanese, Chinese, American, or you neither of them, or with all of them?
No, I would buy more the Japanese perspective.
Japanese.
I don't know how. I'm from Norway, and a few years ago I read some news about kids. Many children, fail while playing in kindergarten, and then I read the views of the minister, and then it's a good sign how kids are very healthy and they're very active. There's no problem, how you proceed. So I kind of these are very tempting views. I don't know, but they are very hard to implement, I guess. I have 2 kids, and it's very, very tough to handle to them. When you really control from your perspective, but if you keep engaging, but that's time consuming, needs a lot of energy, then there's some sort of structures and settlements, and this is my sort of reflection. So I sort of buy this agency perspective also.
Interesting.
Thanks for this good paper. You have sort of kind of mapped the concept of agency from a historical perspective. So I kind of aligning with the concept of authoring agency. So I should only buy that perspective. I don't know how risky that academically, though I'm a PhD student. And then
where are you originally?
Me? I'm from Nepal. I'm in Norway. And my supervisor is from Ukraine. Yeah. And
it's become typical story.
Yes, I'm very much influenced by this culture historical here. Yes.
Okay. So welcome everybody back from discussion. So I'm eager to know what you discussed, what you noticed, what you agree, disagree, what kind of discussion did you have, and in your groups, and what was the most interesting thing. And I know it's very scary to start first, and already, so feel free to start, jump. It's very interesting.
Yeah, maybe our group can, share. We had a very interesting discussion. We had a similar observation. I think we not really agree or disagree, but there's some parts we agree, some parts we feel, we have concern. Like we feel, because I think Jenny in our group, and also Ravanish and Samran. Yeah, because most of our background are high school teachers. So we feel, we definitely need to step in if in Australia context, if we see this type of problematic behavior. But in the young kid situation, like the situation of this age group in the video, we're not quite sure. We also agree with the teacher. By the end of the video, they said, they need to learn. The kids need to learn to manage those conflicts. They learn how to get along with each other. But we think, that's true. But there's also need to be a boundary. Maybe it didn't show in the video. There should be a boundary, like they learn how by themselves. At the same time, teacher also need to at least have teach them what is the right behavior, what is the wrong behavior. And otherwise we Jenny and I, our group will feel like, if kids will leave it by themselves to learn. I think their reaction is like the beginning of the video said, don't play with him. Just if you don't want to be hurt, just leave him. So whether that will create an exclusive situation in the class, all the kids stay away from that. The one who kick others. So we're thinking, there should be a boundary. And but the question is, we're not sure, I think there is a difference between age group for the question whether teachers, like how much we should step in. Yeah, Jenny and Revelations. Yeah, someone please feel free to, to add, to complement what I have said.
I totally agree.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Veronica, let me ask you, you said there is need to be boundaries, and what will happen if there is no boundaries? What are you concerned about?
Yeah, I think Revenish in our group, just before we came out of the breakout room, he observed something, which a little bit concerning us. Yeah, Revenish, what do you want to share what you just told us at the end of the
Sure. Yes, the positive first, just add to our group contribution. The positive point that we also noted while observing the video, there was that female student who supported that male student, showing the positive social gathering that of withdrawing from the withdrawing from the negative groups, because he was unwanted, and it continued, and that girl showed him that we need to be positive and you can play with me. So there was the sign of social positivism. And we also talked about the negligence by the teacher, because we talked about prioritizing between in an educational environment, and environment is not very conducive. It was rather near to the doorway, and teacher continued just making not a very strong statement and without actioning to what was happening. So I think the teacher showed the sign of negligence. And the another concern was I think they are somewhere in the second floor, first floor. The concern of safety. They were in the corridor and then leaning on this railing type of thing. So we were just keeping our fingers crossed that what will happen in the future when your video is played. So I do not know what happened after that, because we show only we were shown only that much footage. So the question of safety too, as a parent and stakeholders and teachers, I think everybody is accountable for that. Yeah, so that was the minus point and plus point. And an interesting point is that about the child who geared up, showed that positivism, that you can, never mind that group is not welcoming, but we are welcoming. So that's to add on.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Other discussions, other interesting things that you noticed? Agree, disagree?
I think in our group, we got Nikolai, Sharon, and Ashraf. Our discussion was kind of related to Veronica's groups, and we mainly talked about the discussion around more about how the learning of empathy and the conflict resolution can happen. Because I think that was in the comments of the educators, that is one of the goals they were talking about, why they are allowing those kind of conflicts happening among children. And I think Nikolai mentioned about the importance. It's not of the learning environment. It is not about getting rid of these kind of conflicts or arguments among children. It's more about how we can help children to overcome this. And then we were discussing about Reggio Emilia philosophy, because in Reggio Emilia philosophy, they also think it's really important for educators to leave some space for children to navigate those kind of conflicts or drama so that they can learn. Yet, we are also thinking it's important for educators to think about their role. What's their role in helping and supporting the children to overcome those kind of conflicts and crises? We know that the crisis or conflicts, when it's too huge, it might become a trauma, but when it is mediated, and then it will become a learning moment. So that's I think I'm not so sure whether I have missed out anything, Nikolai and
No,
Sharon.
it's okay.
Yeah,
No,
would you
it's
like
okay.
to add something?
Sharon, please.
No, I think you summed it really nicely. The only thing that I have since thought in the discussions that we're having is the aspect of the gender. And I know that a colleague of ours have done in early childhood education at the Conceptual Play Lab at Monash University. Dr. Tanya Stevenson has done research in relation to exclusion and gender microaggression in play. And I just thought that that's another aspect that had not been considered. The little boy that was demonstrating the physical behavior, the behavior of the kicking, those microaggressions is something that needs to be considered as far as inclusion or exclusion when children are playing. So that's just something that I'd like to add.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sharon. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? You know what? We can continue, and I know that it's a little bit kind of scary to jump, but let me ask you, can you raise the hand who really likes Japanese approach? Who likes how the teacher acted in the dealing with the conflicts? Okay, John likes it. You can raise, okay. Uh-huh.
You can have half a hand.
Oh, no, half hand. Okay. We will take you.
I think it depends.
It depends. It depends. Okay. So
it depends on how aggressive the child is and what they know about resolving conflicts. Obviously, the little girl knew something about it, but you know, so it depends. I'm not going to be yes or no.
Oh, in that particular case, let's say, of course.
I couldn't see the whole video. I couldn't, it was off my screen, so I couldn't see the whole thing. It didn't look very bad to me, but I'm told there was kicking going off what I could see. So
you can watch that. It's 4 minutes. You can, if you want, you can watch the part that you couldn't see. Okay, well, Michael and Anna and Amar and John and somebody else and Nikolai. Okay, so tell us what you like. You're in minority, but here in our group. So what do you like?
Yes, can I speak, Michalis? Greetings from Greece. I'm very pleased to participate. All the best to all of you. Thank you for having you. That video actually triggered, how can I say that? It came to me, that exemplar from your article, the first lines where you were mentioning the natives from Tongo. And you said that it was like the natives from Tongo that said that they leave the kids like the wild grass under the sky or something like that, and it was like that. So what I'm thinking about that video and the Tongo and the first part of your bit of your article, that yes, I agree with that. That not intervention scenario, because once you start intervening, then you start choosing one from the millions, from the millions and of choice of paths to deal with scaffolding or guiding or trying to help the two children to deal with their problems, but their problems are their own problems. They have nothing to do with your problem, even if you are a teacher. And once you start deal with that, then you automatically employ, or how can I say that? There's an innate cultural, how can I say that? You are already culturally as a teacher, you were culturally grew in a different country with the cultural, the institutional, the morals, everything that has to do with your pedagogy or educational background. And once you start dealing with that, once you start intervening, then you add something from yourself. And this creates that cultural, that dialectic, then the dialectic thing starts over and things start to become complicated. And all this complexity has to do with intervention all around the globe. And if we go back to the Tongo, just to finish with that last comment, if we go back to the natives from Tongo, if you do nothing about that, then it's something that you leave it for the kids to solve the problem, and it doesn't get messy. How can I say that? And interestingly, I think the boundary was the balcony. Actually, the real danger was the balcony, not one kid to another. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Anna. Next.
I like several things about the Japanese approach in this particular case. And that doesn't mean that in general, I always like Japanese approach. But in this particular case, the teacher not intervening right away allowed the two other students to intervene themselves. The little girls coming and giving a lot of advice to Satoshi, little boy in yellow shirt, telling him, didn't we tell you many times, don't play with Hiroki and don't be near him. So there starts a process of children among themselves developing awareness of how to deal with conflicts or not. That's one thing. Second thing, I do agree with the remark of the Japanese principle that if small children do not fight when they are small, that's the problem. Because just talking about values was good or was bad without people letting people experience on their so to speak skin and how they treat each other. Maybe later it could be some reflection at some point of time, but events need to be let to be there. You cannot purify environment from any conflicts and never let them be, which in the American situation, because of many complex political and things of the institutions, the teachers are afraid to even let any conflicts develop. And so they kind of like really trim the environment in such a way that children cannot experience anything like that. In a nutshell, I'll just say that here.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. Armando?
So I agree with the behavior of the teacher, because I think the teacher don't need to intervene in everything that children are doing, because they somehow know how to solve some problems, and it's very difficult for us to control everything and to know perfectly what is better for children to do every time. And I think we have some limitation to interview in everything children do.
Thanks. Thank you, Armando. Hannah, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to build on what actually Anna and I think Michael mentioned, this aspect of the cultural specificity, if that's a word, of this question or of the video that we're looking at. And I mean, I think, you know, what we're kind of discussing here are culturally specifically or pedagogical decisions basically defined in based on different cultural situations. So, each one of us comes with a certain cultural background and socialization background to answer this question, and that will play into whether we agree with the Japanese or with the American way. So I think, I think this is one of the important aspects, is that it's very hard to answer this question in any specific way, because how a Japanese caregiver would solve such a situation would, I think, they would be the best to judge that or answer the question. In what kind of situations do the children need to be able to manage? Do they need to be able to manage these situations themselves, and how? And then the other aspect is that, of course, the question is very individual. We have to look at every single child to kind of decide whether this child needs support or not. I think this has been answered in quite many by many of you already.
Thank you. And Amar, do you want to say something? Because I know that you wrote a very interesting thing, and you came a little bit earlier from the group than anybody else, and we were already discussing that. So do you want to add something to what you wrote?
No, not that much, but I kind of very briefly wrote what I want to, say. But I kind of, take children as a sort of, some have the agency in managing and kind of expressing their voices and managing the conflict they face. Of course, it's not kind of 100% free and can do whatever they do, but in the school context, if we laid them do the things on their own, then we will have a very kind of unique, chance to observe how they are able to solve the situation themselves. But it's a matter of perception, I believe, and it's very hard to combine these two, perception and also the based on the cultures and traditions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you. Thanks. Anybody else want to counter comment, because you like what American and Chinese educators criticize Japanese for being neglective? We already had this wonderful voice. Anybody else want to add to that?
I might just say something.
Thanks, John.
I was really interested actually in the very early part of that video where the girl takes the boy into back into the room, and they kind of have this complex negotiation. One of the things he does is he actually goes out and it may be hitting just some object there, he may be hitting another girl, but that really complex negotiation that she's doing seemed to me really fascinating. And again, you saw it towards the end when the group as a whole is starting to play and break up. There's quite complex negotiation that the students are doing with each other, but it's very gendered. The real complexity of the negotiations is with the girls trying to get the boys who are just sort of kicking and hitting and crying. I mean, he was genuinely very upset. So it's quite interesting to see that was seen to be not to be a major problem. But yeah, that was the really interesting part, looking at the way that those social negotiations started to occur.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thanks a lot. For a short time, we actually touch upon many interesting issues, like starting with let's say, John, but it's not only John. There is, I think Shannon was talking about that, if I'm not mistaken, about these gender issues. Somebody, you know what, I'm sorry, I called mature memory, which is I'm forgetting things very quickly, maybe over mature. So somebody was mentioned about issue of security, and thanks God nothing happened in Japanese when the boys were getting on the balcony, a small balcony there, and looking down and staying there, and the teacher didn't stop them, by the way. Very interesting issues. Also issue about this neglect and this idea that the teacher is neglecting because things can be, well, without interference, how the boy will know, how he will learn. And issue of exclusion, very, very interesting. You know, I really recommend you to read the book Preschool and Culture, which was published, I think, if I'm not, at the end of 80s. I think it's 89. The reason I'm saying that all of these issues were not discussed in the book. Why? Because they were invisible back then. And they discussed other things that may be less visible maybe now, like, for example, cultural continuity and discontinuity. Let me bring like what it's about a little bit. What it's about, like Chinese and American educators, and some of us, you can hear that in the voices, has this idea of continuity of development in the sense of, in the context of conflicts. Basically, this idea, it says something like that. If you don't stop bullying, that become a criminal. While Japanese has completely opposite point of view. They think about discontinuity of development. And for them point of view, that's why they think it's so important for little children to experience that. By the way, they actually make interesting points about comparison these two approaches, continuity versus discontinuity. They say, look at the American society and Chinese society. You have much more crime than in Japan. And maybe it's the reason. Because you're stopping too early, and that's a mistake from your point, from their point of view. Another thing that they discussed in the book, which is not so much we talked about that, it's how different schooling will be based on this kind of discussion will be United States and China versus in Japan. Like, for example, Japanese educators, they think that the primary education happens among children and the teacher's role to orchestrate that. Well, American and many Chinese educators think that education mostly happens because of the teacher. It's from the teacher. That's why if you ask ideal classroom from American and actually Chinese point of view, they would say it's the smaller the better classroom. And that's not in the point of view of Japanese educators, because they think it's about like valuing community and so forth. So I would recommend you to look at this. This is very interesting. So what has anything to do with my presentation? Well, with my paper, although Toga, I'm so glad that you noticed that, because I didn't actually think about that, but you're absolutely right. There is connection between Toga and Japan. That's very interesting ideas. That it's not exactly because the idea is that education and development happen among the peers primarily, and not from the adults primarily, and not through the scaffolding primarily. Even with adults, it's different. So that's also interesting. So what is anything to do? Because in my view, maybe I'm wrong about that, but Joe Tobin research, in my view, was the first kind of dialogic research anti-methodology that happened historically. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe there was something before that. But for sure, Tobin was become aware that there is something in that research, there was something changes, and he couldn't figure out, like, it took him a while. I talked with him, with Joe Tobin. It took a while to realize that it was he's doing is dialogic research. And by the way, he didn't plan to do dialogic research. What he planned to do is sociocultural, what I would call positivistic research. What he wanted to do is to create patterns, abstract patterns from these three different cultural settings, and just present them. And it's another story how general this pattern is. That could be another research, but his research was mostly qualitative to figure out what the pattern is. The problem started for him when he fortunately had a wonderful team of researchers representing all three cultures. Japanese, Chinese, and American. He was from American side. And they suddenly start arguing with each other of the meaning of what they saw with each other. And then they decided to check it with the participants of the research and not participants, because they start checking it with the Japanese educators who were not part of this preschool, and Chinese who were not part of the Chinese preschool, and American who were not part of American preschool. So they suddenly realized that the point of this research is not to create facts, but the point of this research to create, to spur dialogue, like we already started that. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time, and I'm stopping you. Actually, maybe on the most interesting part to focusing on that. And this is, so that's become a very interesting thing about that. And this research is never ending, by the way. That's another thing. Like, for example, we're right now bringing so many new topics that they never discussed. Why? Because time changed. So the dialogue happened not within the same time, not with different cultures, but actually across the time. And I think it will continue. I'm pretty sure that in like with time, other people will start noticing completely different things that we're not even discussing right now. And it will be there. And that's the purpose of research, again, to bring people in dialogue of what they're dialoguing about. They're not dialoguing so much, we're not dialoguing about what we saw, whether or not it's happened or not happened, but so much what meaning of has. Is it good? Is it not good? Why are they doing that? Why are we doing that? So research is constantly, as Joe Tobin was talking about, the research was not mostly about what Chinese, Japanese, and American educators back then doing. It's about us as well. Like suddenly, for us, exclusions, like we started talking about exclusion, and they didn't talk in the 80s about exclusion. We talk about gender. They didn't talk about gender back then. We talk about that safety. We didn't talk. And it's not necessarily because you start thinking, like, why is like talking about safety, for example? And it's not necessarily because we become, like more conscious of safety, because there was a lot of problems back then in Japanese preschool about, if you look at the statistics about kids' injuries, it's not, Japan is not leading them. It's actually reverse. It's United States leading in children's injuries, not Japan. In China, I couldn't see the statistics about that, but if you compare, you will find it's opposite. And actually, in that video, you will hear, if you watch the whole preschool and agriculture, you will see that Japanese educators, they actually preparing us why Americans, because they constantly interfere, why American preschools and institutions produce much more injuries. And they try to make as safe as possible, but they produce much more injuries than Japanese. And that's a kind of interesting paradox. And that. So this is what I want to introduce with this notion of this. So what is sociocultural positivism? And when I kind of developed this idea, my idea is not necessarily to say, let's not do sociocultural positivism. Not at all. I actually, in this research, there is a lot of positive description of the patterns happen, but it's not to limit their, to limit this sociocultural positivism to say this is the whole research is about, to do these patterns, culture, to find cultural patterns. And I kind of brought this notion of cultural patterns as broad sense. It could be historical, political, economic, and institutional patterns, and so forth. And to introduce this idea that to promote this kind of idea of dialogic anti-methodology. And why I call it anti-methodology? It's because in positivism, the idea is the method is very important, super important. And the idea is if you do a correct method and in a skillful way, you will come to the truth. And that's the idea of the positivism. And positivism is coming from idea to study of the given. And the logic approach, it's not about that. And it's about meaning making. It's about discussion of the values and start engaging that which values we like more, which less, why, and engaging in dialogue about that. And the focus of that research not necessarily to generate facts. This is what positivism is about, they generate facts, but to generate, as I say, meaning and judgments, and the judgments are authorial. Like this is where I'm staying, not necessarily, there is no such thing as objective authorship. It's always subjective, and it's not bad, it's good. Where in positivism, like I need to see, it should be out there. So this is my kind of brief introduction to my path, my points, my presentation, and maybe we can right now switch to the other things, which is developing, looking at the clock, or maybe you have questions because we're running out of time. Maybe you have questions and interesting quotes from the article that you want to share, and we can discuss them. So how do you want to do that? Are you ready to do that, or do you want a little bit time with each other again in the groups to develop these questions and quotes from the article?
I have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy.
So, how in the approach you're describing, how do you distinguish between competing claims? How do you evaluate which claim is better?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that a nonsensical question in this approach?
Darcy, this is a very good question, and it depends on the claims. Like, for example, the claim can be non-participation, neglect of the Japanese teacher produces a lot of injuries because of the kids are on the balcony and this is unsafe. God forbid something will happen. This is interesting question, whether or not it's true, and you can compare with, let's say, American approach, cultural approach, and see whether or not it is true that, this super concern about safety produce safe results, because it sounds like it's reasonable that it should. And this is good, and this is where positivism is very good about that. And you can actually do this positivistic research and find out, for example, statistics about injuries in American preschool, and you can look at the Japanese preschool, you can collect this data. So there is nothing wrong about doing this kind of things. On another hand, like if you think about which preschool, which is approach pedagogical better, Japanese or American or Chinese or some other approach, cultural approach, that's become a very interesting question, become better for what and for whom. And that's become an interesting question. And in my view, it's this debate will actually very helpful discussion, debate could be, because it will reveal, first of all, values behind that, behind different approaches, and ecologies in which these approaches flourishing or not flourishing. Like, for example, ecological issue about like why American so much suing, parents were suing schools for injuries. Part of that is because United States has very bad health insurance. And if you look at them, say, for example, New Zealand, when it's a terrific one, you can afford to have a school that I just today noticed that there is an interesting school that has no rules during recess. And to big surprise, they don't have much injuries. But if you try to do this in the United States, you will probably it will be very difficult to do.
Right.
So this is kind of ecological issue, but also about a system of values, like what, like why is it like American schools focused on this? The education is defined by the teacher and not by what's happening in the community of the children.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jenny put a question in the chat. What are the implications for teacher education?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, again, I don't know the situation around the world, but United States, there is pendulum swings or these waves of the reforms going on, and then they hopefully at some point they'll become forgotten. Because I have very, it's not just reform, it's like monopoly, it's just imposition of that. So one thinks about teacher education, in which I actively participate, is like to do this research-based education. Or so which position teacher as a technologist, pedagogical technologist. So research show that you should do this, this, and this, and you should do this, this, and this in skillful way. And so this is why this is kind of a positivistic approach to teacher education. If you think about dialogic one, it will be much more engaged also teachers in understanding like values. What kind of teacher you want to be and why? And actually considering these different cultural ways of the teaching, that will be also interesting, and that will be very, it might be very useful. That involves discussion of the values and meanings. And what, for example, what's education is about, and there is different ideas what's the education, who should define the education, and so on and so forth. This is interesting issues that will redefine the teacher education in my view. Let me just give one example, specific. So I will, in one of my classes, it was such interesting, and unfortunately, I don't remember how it's happened. The students in my class raised the question whether or not teachers of the Hitler, you know, Adolf Hitler, the Nazi guy, the Führer, whether or not his teachers are responsible for crimes against humanity. Because, you know, if they failed his education, this is their responsibility, not full responsibility, but partially. And our class actually split at least in two big parties. And one argued that the goal of education to make people good. And another part of the class were arguing, no, that's not the goal of education. It's the goal of education to inform. And I remember I had one passionate religious student who actually said, she was in the second group. And she said, you guys playing God. And then she stopped and said, no, not God, devil. Because God doesn't want to make us good. God wants to create choices. So we make our choices rather than become robots of good robots. Because without having this moral choice, which is you may be bad and may be good, it's you will create this more, you're taking responsibility out of the people. So in this case, she said the goal of education to inform. The question is whether or not the teachers, the Hitler's teacher, inform him well or not. That's a good question, but you cannot judge that by Hitler behavior, because he can be informed and still choose what he chose. In this case, his teachers are not responsible. But that's part of the discussion of this, in my view, very important for the teacher education, because it brings the core of what's the education is about. Mm-hmm. And who should think like, is it students should define education, or teachers, or politicians, or society? Mm-hmm. Anna?
We just on the side, John and I had a small discussion about the formal and informal education, because John said, and you can all read there, that when does it need arises to actually what children themselves find out, to be guided by adults to some kind of like a what's good and bad. I guess that's what you meant. I'm just paraphrasing. And that's the question that whether the values are a part of education, should be taught, how they should be taught. And of course, values are conflicting because we have very, not only culturally, but among the family. In our small group before, Dadan Nugraha said that in Indonesia, where he came from, there was a case of a father whose two sons were quarreling and fighting, and he closed them in the bathroom to solve their problem, and he would not unlock the door until they found the solution themselves. Checked many times, there was even blood, but they found the solution, which would even in Indonesia not be appropriate for teachers to do. So what's good, what's bad, what's the good conclusion, what's not is a contested thing, and is it in what way is it a part of education?
And also,
could I speak about one of the quotes from the sociocultural? Sorry, it's early in the morning here. I'm still waking up. I think it's just gone 6 o'clock. On page 14 of the paper on sociocultural positivism, right at the bottom of the page, it says that, and it's after the Mr. Jim part. The goal of ontological dialogic education is not to shape students' skills, attitudes, knowledge, and perception in some curricular endpoints, preset known in advance by the teacher, but rather to engage the students in historically unfolding critical discourses about targeted practices, values, and involving issues to address the students and evoke their questions and reply. To inform about influential positions and voices, to promote the student's own voice on the subject matter, to face them with issues of their personal responsibility, engage them in consequential decision-making. Now, I would not disagree with that. In fact, I would entirely agree with that. And it's part of some research that I've been doing over many years with a colleague. But in trying to encourage other teachers to do this kind of work, many find it difficult to let go of a classroom situation and to let it unfold in unknown ways, because many find it difficult to bring it back and to get, because we have this notion in teacher education, certainly in Australia, that there is an end point we want to get to. Curriculum says there's this end point we need to get to. And if we let the discussion and kids have their voice too much, then then we don't necessarily get there. And I disagree with that. But many teachers find that extremely difficult proposition when they're sort of under surveillance, you might say, to actually do the curriculum.
And of course, the question is, why is that? And this is for us an interesting question, like why is that school arranged that, and to make this idea, this type of education that I described difficult, and the other type, which is instrumental, this endpoint education, easy and focused. And that's a very interesting question to consider that. And by the way, that question is, in my view, very sociocultural. Like, why is school institution? It's like you can think about school can be very dysfunctional institution from the point of view that you described, Judy, or it could be functional, very functional institution, but just for different purpose. And that question is like, what is purpose and different values? And what this values is about, why, and so on and so forth. That's very interesting question.
Excuse me, Hannah also put a question in the chat. Is sociocultural research necessarily positivistic? Was Vygotsky's research sociocultural positivism? Would more post-positivistic ontologies accord with the Vygotski's theory better. Yeah, she put 3 questions.
Yeah, this is what I came to the conclusion actually a long time ago, that yes, Vygotsky was very sociocultural, very strong sociocultural positivist. And because he's interested in what positivism is interested in finding patterns, functional, structural patterns. And that was, Vygotsky was trying to do that. And again, in my view, there is nothing wrong about that if it's not the only thing that's happening. Let me just give this idea of his notion of zone of proximal development. You see, in this zone of proximal development, there is it leads to the many ideas like how to organize zone of proximal development and so on and so forth. Well, one of the problems is that, for example, notion of parenting emerged in a way in the same kind of rules. Like what kind of parents should be authoritarian or democratic or what authoritative, right? Indulgent and so on and so forth. But what's interesting is there is not notion much exists of children. Children are very active in shaping a relationship with the parents. I don't know how many parents are here that might start relating to that. And they have their own alternative approaches and their own creativity in developing and shaping parent-teacher-parent relations. And this is something that not well studied or not well focused or not well interested because again, the focus is on parents shaping children rather than children shaping parents, so stuff like that. But again, the bigger issue is that the focus on typicalities, that something typical, again, typical means pattern. And we will know the most interesting part in the human life is not patterns of other people and not how calculatable things about them, but exactly their uniqueness, their unpredictability, their authorship of their own lives and lives with us. And this is why we value people. Yes, there is kind of interest in the typicality as well. There is nothing wrong about that. And it should be studied. But again, in my view, it's not, if we want to interested in the human affairs, this is not the primary focus of human affairs, the typicality, including cultural typicalities. And I think Vygotsky was most interested in that. Again, in itself, there is nothing wrong, but that's what defines, he was studying the given. So the child as a given. And he tried to, by the way, that's view is not necessarily static. Given is not necessarily static. It could be very dynamic. But the whole idea is to how to shape and calculate children and from kind of cultural lenses and cultural, historical, I mean, by culture, I mean, all-embracing thing of that. So he studied particular, what I said in the article. He was not interested in studying so much universal, how many other psychologists were doing and still doing that, like cognitive psychologists. But he's interested in particular cultural particulars, but it's still as a positivistic research, in my view, because he's not addressing the children. He was not focusing on uniqueness of the children, or he's not focusing on eventfulness of the children's life, but on typical, on the tools, on stuff like that. And again, nothing wrong, but limited, very limited. I'm trying to I was looking like what else people would say.
Well, there was one question that nobody asked, but I think is kind of like elephant in the room. When we talk about cultural differences and let's say Japanese way is good for Japan, maybe not good for United States and this and that. But today we live in the world where there is a huge motion of peoples and cultures. Many of us live biculturally, triculturally. Somebody here who lives in UK is from somewhere else and has a mentor from somewhere else, and so on and so on. And so we are experiencing probably more clashes of these different values and what we consider to be normal or good or something like that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that that presents a new reality of the teaching and teachers and education in general as not being just cultural transmission in a way that's socialization, because it immediately is controversial, like whose culture in the same classroom, you know, and what to do about that. So that's a practical and also philosophical question, like what to do when you have cultures that clash in values, where the parent says, no, I want my child to hit another child. He should or she should defend themselves and not let anybody bully them. You know, and the teacher says nobody should, you know, like use any kind of violence or anything like that, or something like.
And which brings interesting question: is socialization in any culture educational, or is it anti-educational actually? And where is the role? What's the role of education in this case in comparison with, let's say, socialization? I just want to bring maybe a comment or motto, famous motto that Socrates brought, which is he said that unexamined life is not worth living. And that's interesting if you think about that. Could it define a vision of education? In this case, you know, unexamined life, which means socialization that you didn't approve, because that's what you need to examine, first of all, whether or not that socialization is good, your life is good or not good. And that's maybe the place for education to be. So the education in a way maybe not constructive, but mostly deconstructive. And that's, again, interesting to discuss, like what's the value and purpose of education. In contrast to, let's say, socialization, development, and many other things, learning, like whether or not usually learning is equated with education. And is it true that learning is equated with education? Should be education, some learning should be not education, and maybe education should be not always learning. It's maybe not about learning always, but about something else. So that's interesting question to entertain. And again, who should ask this question? What's the purpose of education? Should it be society, teacher, or students maybe, or the parents, or who, whatever? And that's interesting also. And can it be like when Socrates made this phrase, he definitely phrased from the point of view of the person, which means student. It's a question for he addressing students. He didn't address teachers. He didn't address society. He didn't address people like, he addressed each of us. It's about our life, not somebody else's life, but about our life. Like, is it an unexamined life is not worth living? And that's kind of interesting approach. Okay, we out of time. Thanks a lot for participation. Yeah. And maybe, John, maybe you can tell what will happen next for the people, since this is first.
Well, I'm not in control. In fact, she is. Veronica is running this event, so I'll leave it to Veronica to tell us what's happening in the next half hour.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Eugene, and thank you for everyone's contribution to this interesting discussion. So we are going to have around 30 minutes break time, and after that, at 10 a.m., in Australia, we're going to have our second speaker, Jo Snuttle. Her topic is the chat research methodology. And during the break time, we also have Wonder Room. You can have access to the Wonder Room in the information sheet. John sent that to us, and Su Xiang also posted in chat. So feel free to join the Wonder Room, can chat with each other during the break time. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you at 10.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Veronica.
Bye.
Thanks, Eugene. Wonderful session.
Thank you.
Really inspiring. Really great way to start.
You ask a very good question, John. I can right now reading that. Whether or not, how can socialization be non-educational? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that we put people together in groups and put them together in schools and classrooms, and it's inherently socialized. The two are kind of. Actually, it's not. I think I've got it the wrong way around. It's not that it is or isn't socialization. It's the fact that the two are kind of in a kind of intimate dance, and it's the ways that learning is affected by the socialization or the social relations that the groups, or not affect. And the way learning affects that is a really interesting question.
Well, one interesting thing about thinking about schooling, it feels so natural. You say that's why we put them together. But we have these Greek scholars here and just speakers here that I just want to throw one interesting thing that as far as I know, this is I'm not speaking in Greek, and the word school is a Greek word. But I talk with my Greek colleagues, and what it means actually literally means, it actually means leisure. So it's a form of leisure. So school, I can imagine that. So in this case, from the Greek point of view of that original word, it's almost impossible to say we bring people together, because it's not leisure. When somebody brings somebody there, leisure starts when the people decide themselves what to do. And so that's a very interesting vision of this schooling, where it's not done on people, but done by people or by students. And the students decide what actually to do. And as a form of leisure, it's not form of the tough work, but it is a form of leisure. And that's interesting. On the other hand, of course, you think about back then when this word is emerged, the Greek society was slave. By the way, the school was not necessarily initially designed for children, but for adults. Not designed, but created this notion of the school as leisurely education, which of course Socratic type of school was very good, or Platonic or Stoic was very good illustration of what they mean by school. When people usually meet together and discuss whatever they want to discuss in the philosophy. That's very different, and there is no classes, there is no lessons, and they didn't have these notions of that. And that's very, very interesting notion of the schooling that historically was emerging and then completely forgotten, and actually hijacked and completely become unrecognizable. First of all, schooling is not leisure, and it's definitely not something that the students usually want to do by themselves on their free time.
Although from an economic point of view, to have the resources to be able to do complex social interactions like schooling needs, I mean, it's not quite leisure, it's just having the resources to be able to have people out of the economic cycle for sustained periods of time doing
It's very interesting, John. There is this Indian educator, Sugata Mitra. I don't know if you heard of him. He comes from New Delhi, but also works in England. And his theory of how the contemporary conventional education evolved and why was that from colonization, especially British Empire, which didn't need computers at that time, but needed people who can govern and manage in a very orderly way so that everything becomes centered from Great Britain colonizers, so that they created schools to educate the governors, the people who can manage and organize this big empire. Today you could do it with a computer, but then you had to have people who in the uniform way can be replaceable among each other, learn the same things to do in the same way for the same purpose and all of that. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. It's kind of the idea is to create smart machine out of people, and that's what the purpose, he argues, what the purpose of the schooling is about. And it still continued to be in modern days to create this machinery that, he's kind of start arguing that, well, we're coming to the point when smart machines should be smart machine, not people acting as smart machines. And for that, we can be liberated from this necessity to be a machine. And that's what redefined education, which is actually, again, happened in ancient Greece, but it was done at the expense of the slavery of other people, and not only slavery. It's interesting that Aristotle discussed who is a free person, and free person is not who is not bounded by slavery, but who are not bounded by necessity. So from his point of view, Greek peasants or artisans or even artists were not free people because they have to sell it and support their life. It's people who don't need to constantly worry about how to support their life. That's the free people. And again, what's interesting is that maybe our whole civilization, thinking of humanity, may be coming to the point when we can start affording that type of life without necessary of enslavement, at the expense of enslaving other people. And that's kind of interesting.
Very interesting.
And if you allow me, perhaps if we go back to that ancient times, we should consider some words like democracy. In that sociocultural context, they were born, and it's about time to start talking about words and their meanings in that chronological in chronotopes as well. If you go to Bakhtin as well, but in back then when they were born, and compare them and do real discussion and dialogue and put them in discourse and see what democracy means now and if democracy exists. Okay, thank you.
And Mikhail, I want to continue that. If you look at the modern society that claim themselves democratic, it's appalling that one of the most important institutions in the society, which is school, is completely non-democratic, which means the students do not engage in decision-making about their life and about their education. And the most formative years they spent in this autocratic, if not totalitarian even, political regime of the schooling. And this is amazing. Almost like all institutions, including military, much more democratized than schooling. And why? Almost like education by almost nature has to be more democratic. It requires freedom. And which as Judy was talking about, that when it's usually there is a lack of freedom to consider things, because you need to force students to arrive at the endpoints. And so it's very interesting, like why this is almost the last institution that exists in the democratic people who committed to democracy that remains super non-democratic.
There was a recent research at Tufts University of the youth, and more than 50% in their finding of more than 50% of American youth have never participated in any kind of activity where they could make any democratic decisions. They have heard of democracy only through maybe textbook, but they never experienced it on themselves. It's, which is really incredibly, you know, when you think of it, like, wow.
And there's clearly an economic process going on there with, you know, the kind of economic processes that we have to induct children into to become part of corporations and part of bureaucracies and part of things which is all very hierarchical. And it actually speaks to the way that economies are changing and knowledge is changing, that much more flexible, much more flattened ways of working are going to be more economically successful and also more intellectually successful. That we're in a time of increasingly rapid change, and in a time of rapid change, having structured, hierarchical, non-democratic relations as our sort of default way that we induct children into our society is going to be less and less successful. And so there's actually a responsibility, not just, you know, for social equity or for, you know, for moral reasons, but also for straight off economic and intellectual, you know, the way knowledge is moving reasons, to have a more, to induct students into being a more democratic, a more active participation in what they're doing. So, you know, I think we've got a very powerful argument and quite you know, even though there is and there will be pulls back towards more conservative understandings of the way that we structure schooling and society, we've actually got a very strong argument that just to be successful, we need to bring these things into our institutional systems, and in particular, as you say, into our schools.
And also interesting question, like liberation of education from other spheres, including economy. You know, I'm not saying that education is not affecting other spheres, it does, but it has its own, also its own realm of itself. Without economy, without its education is kind of existential need of the humanity. And it's rarely considered that. Let me give just one example. And I don't know if that situation is unique to United States or not, but one of the interesting things that in United States happened, very sad, by the way, if whatever financial problems happened in the economy or in the society, the first things cut in school, it was art education. And I ask my students usually, who is very, very interested in art education, who is passionate about art education, like what kind of argument can you develop against this cutting budget for art education? And it's very interesting to hear there, because you can hear this almost like hegemonic discourse through them. Like they say, well, art is very important because it increases math test scores. And I kind of ask, who is enjoying music or dancing or painting or the movies just to increase their own math test scores? Nobody. And it's interesting, this discussion of art is actually existential need of the humanity. You know, it almost sounds illegitimate. If you say, oh, music will help to increase like STEM points or science or readings, that's legit. But just to say music is an important part of the human life, That's not legit. And I think we need to focus at some point to argue that education, it has its own realm, like art. Not because it's pragmatically useful for something, but it has value in itself, like intrinsic value, which means that education can never be stopped. Like there is no such thing as educated people. Like the same thing is very bizarre to say, you know, I'm done with the arts. I'm arted person. I'm done with the arts. I will never listen any more music, paintings, movies, whatever. I'm done with that because I'm finished.
Graduated.
I'm graduated. Yes, I'm graduated. But nevertheless, with education, it's kind of sad, which is bizarre because it's definitely not true. People are hungry for these things, but that hunger is usually happened outside of schools, because in the schools, when you put that in your throat and you start disliking that.
And usually stop recording.
Yeah. Okay.